Hello, and welcome to Online with SFFP, Maurice Tourneur, Franco-American Pioneer. My name is Kathy Rose O'Regan. I am the Executive Director of San Francisco Film Preserve. We are a film preservation-focused organization based in San Francisco. Our mission is to restore, preserve, and provide access to the world's cinematic heritage, ensuring works of cinema remain accessible for future generations. Through education, advocacy, and collaboration, we aim to inspire a deeper appreciation for the art of film while safeguarding its cultural significance for years to come. We are currently working on 4 restorations, including Lewis Milestone's The Garden of Eden, and we have another 4 exciting projects lined up to begin a little later in the year. Last month, we released our first Blu-ray package with our dear friends at Flickr Alley. This beautiful Blu-ray package features Behind the Door and Below the Surface, 2 underwater adventures directed by Irving Willett and starring Hobart Bosworth. Beyond the work of restoring and preserving films, SFFP is dedicated to raising awareness of and exposing audiences to the endlessly fascinating world of film preservation, which is why we started this monthly series of free presentations on all things film. We are delighted to be joined today by Christine Leteux. Christine is a film historian based in Paris. She is the author of Albert Capellani, Pioneer of the Silent Screen, Continental Films, French Cinema Under German Control, and Maurice Tourneur, Franco-American Film Pioneer, which will be published by the University of Wisconsin Press. She is the translator of several books by British film historian and filmmaker Kevin Brownlow, and the winner of the Raymond Chirat Prize awarded by the Lumière Institute in Lyon. Christine's presentation today focuses on the life and work of Maurice Tourneur. In 1914, an unknown French director arrived in New York. 4 years later, Maurice Tourneur was one of the most celebrated American filmmakers with D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille. From his beginnings as a painter, this presentation will endeavor to recapture the essence of an artist who helped to shape the feature film in Fort Lee, New Jersey. The screening will be followed by a Q&A, so if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So now I would like to welcome on screen Christine Leteux.
Hello, everybody. I don't know if I should say good evening because, well, it's quite evening over here in Paris. So I'm really delighted to talk to you about Maurice Tourneur, who has been really a pet project of mine for many years. So today I'm going to take you to travel back to the 1910s and 1920s on both sides of the Atlantic to discover the silent work of Maurice Tourneur. And we are going to discover the American studio where really the modern filmmaking was invented, together with many French technicians and French directors. Next slide, please. Maurice Tourneur was born Maurice Félix Thomas on the 2nd of February 1876. He was the son of a costume jewelry maker, really from a lower middle class family. And he was the eldest of 3 siblings. And actually, it's interesting to notice that both his brother and his sister both became also stage actors later on and took also nicknames. Next slide. In around 1892, Maurice started working as an apprentice with a painter called Adrien Karbowski, a pupil of the famous Puvis de Chavannes. And he helped the painter, to do the decoration of a town hall outside Paris. And this picture that you see here, I took it, in Nogent-sur-Marne town hall. And this is just a detail of the huge painting. And I was happy to discover that actually Maurice not only helped the painter, but he also was used as a model. So you can see him here, as he was at the time, as a painter. So he worked really in painting. He was a decorator, he was an illustrator until 1897, when he had to join the army for military service. Next slide. When he was discharged from military service in 1900, he decided to become an actor because he had been working a bit as a stage decorator, and he became interested, in acting. And in 1902, he was lucky enough to be hired by a famous actress, Gabrielle Réjou. Well, she's more famous as Réjeanne. Réjeanne was probably the most famous French actress after Sarah Bernard at the time. And she hired him as a stage manager because she was going on tour with a company in Northern Africa and in South America. So he really worked, at rehearsing actors and carrying, the luggage and, all the technical aspect, of touring company. And in 1903, he was hired by a very famous French stage director, André Antoine, who made pictures later on, but at the time he was mostly a stage director, who was really pioneering at the time because he really insisted in naturalistic acting, that actors really didn't try to overact. And Maurice really learned his trade with him. Next slide. During the tour in South America, Maurice fell in love with one of the actresses of Antoine's company. Her name was Fernande Petit, but she had a stage name as Van Doren. So they got married in 1904, and 9 months later, Jacques, the future Jacques Tourneur, was born. It was their only son. Next slide, please. Probably around 1912, Maurice started working in a film studio as a film extra. It was quite common for stage people to go, in film studio just to try to make a little extra money, really. And at first, he was not that interested, but he caught the bug quite quickly. And he became assistant to a director who already was established within the Éclair studio. That director was Émile Chotard, also a former actor. And finally, Maurice just left the stage for good and became really full-time, a worker at Éclair Studio. I should mention that Éclair was the third company in terms of production after Pathé and Gaumont, so it was a fairly important company. And we don't know exactly when he started making his own picture. He stopped being just an assistant, probably during the summer of 1913, probably. Next slide. It's very difficult to determine actually which picture Maurice directed when he worked at Éclair. The reason is that until 1914, no film company actually ever credited its director. So all the credits we get nowadays are, credits done with later documents, so there's no precision really. We are not absolutely sure, except for a few pictures. And this is one of them. What you see here is Le Friquet, one of the rare Tourneur from Éclair that has survived, still an extant print. The film was actually released in America under the title The Sparrow, which is a direct translation of Le Friquet. And it deals with the story of a woman. She's a foundling, she's been raised by a clown, and she's a trapeze artist. And I've decided to show you a clip of that film. And you're going to see that early on, actually, Maurice had already very innovative camera angles. So we're going to watch the end of Le Friquet, where the poor Friquet discovers that the man she's in love with actually is with another woman. And she's going to take her own life. During the spring of 1914, Maurice was sent to the US to work for the subsidiary company of Eclair over there. And he arrived in New York on the 1st of May 1914. He was absolutely completely unknown. I mean, he was not even mentioned in the corporate press of the time. And he went to work in Fort Lee, which at the time was the hub of filmmaking in the East Coast. And as you can see on the map, it's just a stone's throw from Manhattan. And the reason why it was located here is obviously it's very close to Broadway. So as a result, you could hire actors very easily. Next slide, please. When Maurice actually arrived, he worked for the Peerless World Studio, where you see here just a picture taken, in that studio. So they were really like a giant glass house. So that filmmaker could actually work using, sunlight, real sunlight, as well as artificial light. And I thought it would be best if we watch actually a little clip of a picture Maurice made in 1916, where we're going to have a look at the Paragon Studio. So here's the staff arriving in the morning. The inside of the studio with the various sets being working at the same time. They're moving sets and so on. And this is the back lot. There's a cameraman perched on top of that platform. I can't see it very well. I think it's a bit cut at the top. Well, that's it. When Maurice arrived in America in 1914, actually, there were already quite a lot of French technicians working there. There were, all sorts of people working in the studio, also in the laboratory. And previous to Maurice, there was Etienne Arnaud, who arrived in 1911. He was a film director who worked first for Gaumont, and then he moved to Eclair, so he was sent to Eclair. And slowly more directors arrived because of the war, obviously. So first there was Émile Chotard, so who was Maurice's mentor at Eclair, came in 1915. Then Albert Capellani, who was the great director from Pathé. And in 1917, Léonce Perret was one of the star director of Gaumont, came in America as well. So really the influx of French directors and technicians was actually very important at the time. Next slide, please. So when he arrived, Maurice decided to organize for himself, a crew of talented technicians. So he handpicked, a young man called John van den Broek, who was from German-Dutch descent, but he was also a French speaker because he had been to school in France. And he previously worked as a photographer for Lumière. And he became a cameraman, a very talented cameraman. So really, Maurice made a very good choice. And then he took Ben Carré. His real name was Benjamin Carré. He was originally a painter, a stage decorator. And he started working in filmmaking quite early on. And he was extremely talented. So was Lucien Driot, another cameraman, also a Frenchman, will move to America and will stay for his entire career. Next slide, please. Maurice's very first American feature was called Mother, and it came out in September 1914. And immediately it caught the eye, of the producers at World Film. They were impressed that Maurice actually had the idea to recreate a famous Whistler painting in his film, Whistler had painted a portrait of his mother that you see reproduced here. And Maurice had the idea to include that in his picture. Unfortunately, we cannot check because the film is lost. Next slide. But he really made a sensation when he made his third picture called The Wishing Ring, which was an enormous critical success. And we're going to watch a clip of that picture because it shows, some editing technique which are really very much advanced for 1914. You've got to remember that in 1914, most French films were done in long shot. There was no reaction shot, no medium shot, nothing like that. Whereas in that picture, you got all of that. And I've got to also to precise that Maurice did the editing himself with his operator, John van den Broek. At the time, there was no editor. I forgot to mention a bit the story. If you've never seen, the Wishing Ring, here you see the son of an earl. It's supposed to take place in England, who is making a racket with his school friend, drinking and so on, and he's going to get arrested. For his next picture, Maurice was even more innovative. Actually, that picture you see on the screen there, most of the people there are jailbirds. It's actually the preview of Elias Timmer Valentine inside Sing Sing prison. Because part of the picture was actually shot inside and they used the inmates, as film extra. To thank them, they organized the preview. And as you can see, it was on the 14th of February. On the 14th of February, this is Valentine's Day. And I suspect it was a publicity stunt, organized by Louis J. Selznick, David O. Selznick's father, who was one of the directors at World. Next slide. Because one of the great innovations that Maurice organized for that picture, he had a platform built right underneath the studio roof so that the cameraman can climb on top and take, the scene in a high angle shot, what you see below. So this is what we are going to have a look now on the clip, which is some burglars, getting inside a bank and they are breaking into the safe. Some pictures were also shot outdoors, not necessarily in studio like this one, this comedy called The Cub. And this picture is particularly interesting because Maurice just got, another crew member who joined, his company. This is the young man you see here sitting underneath the camera with a white hat. His name was Clarence Brown. At the time, he had been working, as a car engineer, but he decided to leave the company because he loved cinema so much, and he has to become Maurice's assistant. And he was his assistant for the next 7 years, and he learned his trade with Tourneur. And we're going now to watch, the opening credits of that picture, The Cub, because I think it's quite funny. It's an unusual opening credits because you see the lead actor, Johnny Hines, actually introducing each of the character of the picture in a very humorous way. And also there's quite a lot of interaction with the spectator. In 1916, Maurice started to attract some important stars. And here you've got an example. This is the British actor House Peters, who just became a star around 1915, making westerns with Cecil B. DeMille, in particular The Girl of the Golden West. But he wanted so much to work with Tourneur that he actually left the West Coast and went back to New York to work specifically with Maurice. And they make 4 pictures together. Unfortunately, only one reel of 2 of them actually have reached us, which is a real shame because he was a brilliant actor. Next slide. Another great name that Maurice attracted is George Beeban. He had become really famous thanks to Thomas Harper Hill's picture called The Italian in 1913. And in that picture, The Pawn of Fate, he plays a really incredulous peasant, gets attracted to Paris. But what I want to share with you is this picture, which shows, how small the crew was, for making pictures at the time. So Maurice is standing at the back. You see him in his shirt sleeve, and he's pointing. Behind the camera, you get John Van den Broek. So he was actually maneuvering the camera as well as setting up the lights. And Tourneur's 2 assistants are just below him. On the right side, you've got Clarence Brown, and on on the left-hand side there is Clarence Brown, on the right-hand side is George Cole. And in the foreground, you've got George Beeban and Doris Kenyon. And it's interesting to note that this picture survives only as about 3 reels, and the reels were discovered, in Dawson City in Yukon, underneath a skating ring in the 70s. Next slide. Then Maurice was actually hired by the biggest star of them all, Mary Pickford. Mary Pickford had her own unit within the famous Players Lasky at the time, and she could select her stories and her own directors. So she asked specifically to work with Maurice. So they first made a picture in Marmalade, Massachusetts. And you see here a picture, Pride of the Clan, supposedly in Scotland. And next slide. But the most important picture is really Poor Little Rich Girl, made in 1916, which was one of Mary's biggest public success, I mean, critical and public successes. And this is the first time that Maurice actually used stylized sets in a picture, something he would do again. But you have to realize that we are in the 1916, and you know, German expressionism didn't start until a few years later. So Maurice was very much in advance. So we're going to watch a little clip from Poor Little Rich Girl, where Mary's been drugged by a nasty nurse, and she's starting to have nightmares, and she's meeting death. And death, this is a woman wearing a black veil. But it's with the Bluebird in 1918 that Maurice really reached the peak of his profession. I mean, suddenly he was considered the equal to W. Griffith, to Cecil B. DeMille, because of the sets and the splendid special effects designed by Ben Carey, which were praised to the sky, you know, in the press and in the whole industry. It's an adaptation of a Maurice Maeterlinck play, and it's also, you know, absolutely full, you know, of this stylized set, which predates so German expressionism by several years. Next slide. Maurice then was famous enough to actually make the cover of some trade magazine, like you see here, Photography. And so during the year 1914 to 1918, Maurice was made 27 features in 46 months. That's one feature film every 6 weeks. That's an enormous output, and that's really a record for the time. Next slide. So he went on making pictures using stylized set like Prunella, where, you know, you see that the sets are just made of cardboard, like a children illustrated book. The problem is the film was praised in the press, but it was a financial disaster, like the Bluebird, because this kind of picture was considered too arty and exhibitors didn't want them. So the film were shown only in very big cities like New York. So Maurice realized that we have to do something about that. Next slide. In 1918, he created his own company, Maurice Tourneur Production, and the first film he put into production is Woman. So it was really a really expensive production, looking, some kind of a tongue-in-cheek, misogynist look of women through the ages. But it's a tremendous, undertaking artistically. I mean, Carré had to rebuild set, to recreate, for example, the Rome of Emperor Claudius. And Maurice had the idea that he didn't want actresses to play the parts of the various women. He hired dancers. He thought dancers were more, at ease for moving in front of the camera. And it was also a way to reply to the craze, the silly vamps, of the time, Theda Brar has all the craze. And he thought it was absolutely ridiculous. And he thought, using dancers was far more realistic. So, for example, to play Messalina, he hired Flora Revales, and she was a ballet dancer from the Ballet Russe. And we're going now to watch a little clip where you're going to see Empress Messalina going to the slums of Rome to seduce men. Yeah, just look the way she's seducing this man. I think is fantastic. Yeah, at the end of 1918, Maurice actually moved to California. It was a time when Fort Lee was becoming deserted because of first there was the flu pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, the very, very cold weather, shortage of coal and electricity. So, slowly, Fort Lee was deserted. So Maurice arrived in California, and it was really big changes for him because he lost his beloved cinematographer during the shooting of Woman. John van den Broek actually drowned. He was only 23. So Maurice had to replace him. Around that period, 1918, Maurice was already, you know, a member of the Motion Picture Directors Association. This is a picture you see here. Maurice is underneath the cross. And you never guess who is this dark man under the arrow, under the black arrow. Well, actually, this man is Francis Ford, John Ford's elder brother. At the time, he was far more important than his brother. So when you think about it, a few years later, he was reduced to play a tiny part in his brother's picture. So really, fame was very transient in those years. Next slide. So once in California, Tourneur decided he wanted to make bigger picture and use, you know, the outdoors. And also he wanted to select picture which could be, you know, a success with a larger audience, because his arty pictures were wonderful but made no money. So he tended to select, you know, what they were called Drury Lane melodramas that were created in a Drury Lane theatre in London. So one of them is The White Heather. The film was lost until recently, but fortunately the San Francisco Silent Film Preserve has done a marvelous restoration, and we're going to be able to watch a little clip of this great picture. And I selected a short sequence where you're going to see Jack Gilbert, as he was called at the time, not John Gilbert yet. He was a member of Tourneur's crew, working as a screenwriter, as well as playing a small part. And in this sequence, he's going through the slums of London looking for a missing sea captain. And you're going to enjoy, you know, the wonderful sets created by Carré and the superb lighting by René Guissard. In 1920, Maurice made one of his best picture, really, which was a great financial and critical success, The Last of the Mohicans. And he had to share the credit with Clarence Brown because he fell during the shooting and he hurt himself. And this is really a turning point in his career, because the film was produced by Associated Producer, a company which he had created with various other big filmmakers, but the company collapsed the year after. And afterwards, Maurice had really huge difficulties. Next slide. During the later part of the 20s, Maurice really lost artistic control. He was really becoming really a mere employee, you know, filming scripts that were given to him. But once in a while, he was making really an exceptional picture, and this is one of them, The Isle of Lost Ships. I mean, the storyline sounds like a Jules Verne novel. I mean, something really crazy, where you've got the heroes are stranded on an island made of shipwrecks, and to escape the place, they actually build a submarine. I mean, the film was very much loved also and admired by Jacques Tourneur, but the bad news is the film is lost. Next slide. In 1923, actually, Jacques started working with his father as assistant. He was mostly, you know, script boy or second assistant while he was really learning his trade with his father. And around that period, you know, probably around 1925, Maurice bought a 16 millimeter Kodak camera and he started making home movies. Sometime of his own shootings, or he was sometimes filming also his home. And among them, there is something I want to show you here, because it's quite funny because it's actually not just, you know, home movies. It's got editing. So I suspect that Maurice made this little slapstick comedy with his son to actually teach him how to edit, how to make a picture. So this was shot in the backyard of their house in Los Feliz, Hollywood. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, this is one of Maurice's last picture in America, Old Love the New. And it was a terrible picture. I mean, the reviews were really awful. So it's really a blessing, actually, the picture is lost. And if you look carefully, actually, at this advertising, you realize that Maurice Tourneur is at the very bottom, in the middle. There, his name is written in tiny letters, which just shows, you know, how much, you know, is lost, you know, greatness, you know, among other directors. And however, the film is lost. But the good news is Maurice actually had taken his 16 millimeter camera on the set. So we're going to watch a tiny clip where we're going to see father and son working together on the set of this picture, of this lost picture. So there's Maurice with a hat on here in the middle. Jacques with a funny hat. This is actress Barbara Bedford. So it's supposed to take place in the Sahara Desert, obviously, because it's a chic type picture, except that it was shot in California. So there's Jacques and Maurice. It just shows, you know, there was such complicity between the two men. I mean, it's quite obvious. Well, in 1926, Maurice had enough, of this new system, where the director was reduced to being, just a mere studio employee. So he decided to return to Europe. So he made films in France, in Germany, and finally in 1929, he actually managed very well, actually, the transition to sound. So he made a lot of pictures during the sound era. And if I've selected this particular one, La Main du Diable, which he made during World War II for a German company, Continental Film, it's because this picture, if you look at the image carefully, actually it's striking to notice that it's got, stylized sets, like the one he was using, in Blue Bird. So he had not completely forgotten, what he had done, during the silent era. Next slide. So this is the end. So let's think, what is Maurice's posterity? I mean, in America, I think he's still considered an important pioneer. I mean, 4 of his pictures are on the National Registry list, which is quite amazing because they're all obviously silent pictures, So it's Witching Ring, Poor Little Rich Girl, The Blue Bird, and Last of the Mohicans. I mean, Jacques Tourneur's got only 2 pictures, on the National Registry list. And I wanted to add that next year, it's 2026, we are going to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Maurice's birth. So I just hope there will be more restoration like the one we've seen, of the White Heather, of some of Maurice's masterpieces. And I should add that, my book about Maurice, which was published in France in 2015, will be released by University of Wisconsin Press probably toward the end of this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. Sorry, I don't know why my microphone is making that noise. Okay, seems to have stopped. There we go. Thank you. That was wonderful. Your research is so deep and incredible. And I cannot wait to read your book in English because unfortunately I cannot read French very well. So greatly looking forward to that release. We just have a few minutes. So I've got a few questions. We'll see what we can get to. Something I'm interested in, though, obviously we didn't really get to cover in this, is his return to France. How was he received in France as a Frenchman who had entirely built his career, or the majority of his career, in the US and become this very significant filmmaker? So I'm kind of interested to see how he was received in the French film community when he returned.
Well, actually, not that well. It was actually a very, very difficult return, let's say, because as soon as he came back to France, he actually made a picture about World War I. And he had not actually, joined in the war. He should have. And he was a draft dodger. So there was a huge scandal in the press, and he was expelled from France.
Oh, that's really not great.
And he had to go to Germany for a year and so on, and then beg the French government to let him go back to France. And well, he did, just at the transition to sound. But he had difficulties with the French authorities for many, many years, really.
Really?
Because
Okay.
I'm not even sure he ever regained actually his French nationality either.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, because at the time when you transitioned, you became American, in 1921. When you became American, the problem is you lost, your original nationality. You couldn't be binational at the time, you see. So yeah, so he was considered a draft dodger in France, and after a while he lost his American nationality. So he was, in a quite complex situation. Yeah.
That's like statelessness, basically. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sounds like a whole other story to investigate.
Well, it's investigated in my book in detail. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Phoebe just asked if this recording will be available online, and it will. It is being recorded and it will be available on our website in the coming days. We just have to do a little bit of editing to make sure everything looks good before we put it online. But if you subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on social media, we'll be posting about the recording. Okay, so just one or two more questions before we finish up. I'm interested to know how much you think his origins as an artist, as a painter, influenced his work, particularly with the use of color in silent cinema. I think for people who are involved in silent cinema quite heavily, like ourselves, we're so aware of how prevalent color was, but so often people think silent movies were all black and white. But with The White Heather alone, which we restored last year, I mean, the tinting and toning was so magnificent and so important to the film. So yeah, I'm just wondering how if you think that his painterly.
Yeah, I think it's definitely significant. I mean, it's like the way the lighting he used. You know, obviously he was always having dark foregrounds, and the actors we know were backwards. You know, a bit on the background with light. I mean, basically, you know, the structure of his lighting was three-dimensional. You know, it was really impressive at the time, something very unusual. And you're absolutely right. I think they always use tinting and toning for all his pictures. The problem is we've got very few, you know, prints that have reached us, you know, in good condition, so we can actually figure out, you know, how good it is. So I'm so glad that, you know, White Heather looks so good, because it really gives a great idea of what it looked like.
Yes, thank you. We were very happy with the restoration. Kyle Westfall is asking, and I had the same question myself, in fact, where can we see Tourneur's home movies? Where did you find them? They're fascinating.
Well, I actually saw them at Kevin Brownlow's, because he managed to recover some 16mm film from Tourneur Last Companion. You know, he spent the rest, the last part of his life with Louise Lagrange, you know, was also a silent movie actress. She worked a bit in Hollywood and also a lot in France with Feuillade and so on. And he met her, I think, in the 60s, and she had all these reels of films she never used. So he asked, and she gave him, you know, some of them.
Wow.
And they're really fascinating, because you can see, you know, all sorts of stuff. I mean, I selected, you know, the bit which was, I thought, you know, the most interesting.
So we would have to go to Kevin Brownlow's house to see more home movies. Very good. Sorry, just a quick question.
Have a look.
Asks, do I remember correctly that Mr. Tourneur was very angry when producers came into films and took the last word as regards the filmmaking? Did he have a reputation?
Absolutely. This is why he left the US actually in 1926, because he was working on an adaptation of Mysterious Island for MGM, and MGM insisted on having a supervisor on the set. He couldn't stand having a supervisor, so he kicked him out. But Louise B. Mayer said, "You need a supervisor on the set. Everybody has to have a supervisor." So he said, "Well, if that's the case, I quit." And that's what he did. He left, took a boat back to France, because he knew that in Europe he would have more freedom, you know, more artistic freedom. He would be able to do what he wants and not be, you know, obviously he got other problems, as I explained.
It sounds like that didn't work out great. Fair enough. Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to finish up. Christine, thank you so much for your time, for your fascinating presentation. And for everybody watching, if you want to learn more, please keep an eye out for Christine's book, which will be out towards the end of the year or next year, I believe.
No, towards the end of this year, yeah, probably. Yeah.
Okay, great. And that's University of Wisconsin Press. From us here at SFFP, I just want to thank all the attendees and, of course, Christine for joining us today. To keep up with San Francisco Film Preserve, please follow us on social media. We are at SF Film Preserve. The next installment of Online with SFFP takes place on May 16th, when we'll be joined by our wonderful colleague, Maria Fuentes, to discuss her painstaking restoration of Alan Dwan's Padlocked, which is a beautiful film, and it was a really intense restoration. So you should definitely tune in for that. As regards The White Heather, which we restored last year, it premiered at MoMA in New York at the start of January. Brad Chisholm just asked if it has been scored. It is currently being scored, and it will be available soon on our website and on the NFPF website, because it was funded by the National Film Preservation Foundation, which we are very grateful for their incredible support. And it will also be available for loan to any organizations who screen films on 35mm, which is hand tinted and toned, are available in digital formats as well, of course. So keep an eye on our website, on our newsletter and social media for more updates. And thank you all so much for being here. And most of all, thank you, Christine, for a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.